Alrighty. Thank you so much, Jackie. I always love seeing hillsides of rams. So our next presenter today will be Hannah Hemmelgarn, and she comes from the Center of Agroforestry at the University of Missouri. She oversees their communications and outreach department, working on a wide variety of projects, bringing education and knowledge about agroforestry practices to a wide audience. And so today she has a very special presentation that kind of brings together some of our technical knowledge about forest farming and using it as a vehicle for building relationships. So, everyone, welcome Hannah.
Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I think really my presentation will be similar in some ways to what Karam talked about, but for Midwest, because that's where we are. And this is relational work, and I want to really center that it's relational in terms of our connections with each other and what we can learn from each other, and also our relationship with the land. And as Badger talked about, really paying attention and learning from the plants themselves. And Jackie's presentation was a perfect example of that. Okay, so a little bit about the Center for Agroforestry where I work. It's really special at the University of Missouri, really unique. It's one of very few agroforestry focused organizations in the nation. We have the only agroforestry graduate program in the nation. And there's also an online master's in agroforestry for folks who are remote. It was established in 1998, so we have some longer running tree crop research. There are grad students in this room and some of my colleagues. And Ray Lynn is also a PhD student with us doing forest farming research, of course. And we offer pretty comprehensive and intensive training programs. The Agroforestry Training Academy is one that's been going for about 10 years now. And we've trained hundreds of people as part of that. It started as a train the trainer, but has expanded to farmers who we recognize as trainers also. And we're right in the middle of that program between the online course and the in-person. So just a lot to offer. If you're not already familiar with our work, if you go to centerforagroforestry.org, you can sign up for our e-newsletter. We just send it out once a month, and it's all the good stuff. So you can see what we're up to and how you can be involved if you're local. I always start out presentations with a nod to the plants and the people who have stewarded these plants for thousands of years. And this, because we're talking about forest farming, this conversation is going to be carried into the rest of the presentation. So, we were just looking at all those pretty pictures of ramps. There's another one that's in Colombia. These are just a few of the plants we work with, and just want to express a lot of gratitude for the plants as teachers and these land stewards who have come before us. Is this working? Oh, it is. Okay. It's not, I don't see it changing on my screen, but that's okay. So as part of that, a land acknowledgement also at the University of Missouri, also a land grant, just like Lincoln University. And so we are benefiting directly monetarily from the wealth of the land, and also from the land itself and our ability to work on this land. As I mentioned, we have access to land for long-term tree crop research because of this, you could say, gift, or the way the land was acquired for the university. So I think it's important to name that we are here on land of the Osage. The Ponca, Kaw, Omaha, and Quapaw are also among the Degihasuan tribes. And then there were also, of course, the Oto and Missouria, the Illini and Iowa on this land, and still on this land. Okay, I don't know how, if this has been discussed. I unfortunately wasn't able to make it yesterday, but forest farming in agroforestry terms is just one of these sort of a handful of silos that we put different practices in. So we talk about silvopasture, which has come up. That's the integration of livestock with trees and forage, windbreaks and riparian buffers, alley cropping, community food forests. And it's important, I think, to name these also even though we're just talking about forest farming today, because some of the plants that we work with and the ways that we apply forest farming techniques can be integrated into these other practices. So I think it's important to not limit ourselves to only be looking at forest farming technical guides, for instance, because we can be growing ramps or elderberry or golden seal in other within other conservation practices too. The important thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to start out kind of big picture and then funnel us into the more local, is that for any of these practices to be effective, it has to be ecologically relevant. We have to have site suitability, and there has to be social and structural readiness. So the infrastructure, like Jackie was talking about, like making processing, getting the roots cleaned off more easily, getting those ramps to the buyers, all of that has to be in place. So when we start thinking through all of the options, the big menu, even just within forest farming, um, we can start with site suitability. That's a good place to start. I think this is just an interesting map to show also the power of peer learning networks. And this is a map it's from the ag census, the last ag census that was published, and with some really great discussion in the article referenced there from the National Agroforestry Center with USDA Forest Service. But this is just showing the number of farms by county reporting at least one of those 5 common agroforestry practices. And we know from the regional agroforestry regional working groups and other, where there are incentive programs, where these things are already in place, that ecological relevance and social readiness, that's where we're seeing those darker blue areas with more agroforestry adoption. And then zooming in a little bit more to forest farming, this is just one example. This is from the Virginia Tech Root Report. And this is the reported golden seal harvest with the range map, and we can see that we got a little representation in Missouri. That's a good sign. And Appalachia, of course, is more the hot spot, which is why we have some folks from Appalachia here, which is great. We have a lot to learn from them. And to me, this indicates potential. And and what it requires is mindfulness about that site suitability, the ecological relevance, and also how we can promote more social and structural readiness. Another factor here is the fact that Missouri has a lot of small landholders. And I know that's a really important part of the work that Lincoln University does through extension, is addressing the needs of smallholders. So this is the number of private forest landowners in Missouri. And you can see that the great majority have less than 20 acres. Less than 50 acres is an even greater percentage. So forest farming is a perfect fit for small forest landowners. Another piece of that is the price per acre of different land types. So really good cropland is a lot more expensive than what they're calling here timber or hunting recreation land. So more affordable, more smallholders. To me, this reads opportunity for forest farming. We have limited knowledge, though. We have a lot of work to do there, I think. But I just wanted to highlight some of the folks who have been doing this work here in Missouri. Sarah Holtein Massengale is in Salem, Southeast. She is with MU Extension, and she focused her PhD research at Center for Agroforestry on a narrative inquiry of wild harvesters in the Ozarks and the importance of these harvests culturally. So we know a little bit about the fact that there is a culture for these forest botanicals. And then Badger Johnson, who is here, we've heard he disappeared, but he was looking more at the ecological management approaches, and what that looks like for forest stewardship also for these plants, a few of the more common plants. Okay, I'm gonna breeze through the next few slides because I think Karam really hit this well, but forest farming, of course, is the intentional manipulation or management of forested lands to both improve the forest stand and produce diverse marketable crops or non-timber forest products. And there are so many. NTFPs. And I think this kind of comes back to those maps. We've got a lot of smallholders in Missouri, potentially people who would be interested in some other supplemental income. Um, Maybe this isn't their full time job, but it's something that they might be interested in because they enjoy being out in the woods. That's part of it too. So, the big list of NTFPs. We got edible and culinary products, mushrooms, nuts, honeys, syrups, saps, fruits, berries, leaves, roots, shoots, ferns. The list goes on and on. This is the longer list of those common mushrooms that can be cultivated, floral and decorative products. There are specialty wood and craft products, and more people doing this kind of thing. We got Art in the Park coming up in Columbia in a couple weeks, and these are high value products. Oh, I think I'm skipping here. Agrotourism, forest tourism. There's not a catchy word there, I don't think yet, but practices like Shinrin-yoku or forest bathing. I'm not seeing anyone doing that here yet, but I think there's growing awareness about the health benefits of just being in the forest, and yet another opportunity that we might put in this category of forest farming. And then of course the forest botanicals that we probably think most often of, the golden seal and ginseng and all of the other plant parts, not just the roots that can be part of those harvests in a sustainable way. And of course, the conservation component is really important, as we've heard from experience and from the research. If we're not really mindful about propagation and thinking about how long lived these plants are, how long it takes them to get to maturity, then the populations are going to be in decline. So the what I want to point out here is this asterisk piece. So all of the plants listed with an asterisk may be forest grown verified. I don't know. Did anyone talk about forest grown verified yesterday? Did you, Janine? Okay. Okay. So that's just one way that you can add a sort of recognition of your conservation, your stewardship practices for these plants, that you're cultivating them in a good way. And also, forest farming doesn't always look like tending these plants, propagating these plants in an existing wooded area. It can also be done under a, uh, a cultivated canopy, a created canopy, or even in more of what we might think of as a forest garden. So this kind of comes back to that, like the list of practices and where the plants themselves fit into multiple practices, not just what we immediately think of, what comes to mind with forest farming. And that is also connected with the NRCS piece and what programs are relevant. So this is probably not even a comprehensive list, but this is just some of the EQIP practices. That's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program through NRCS. Missouri, fortunately, in part, I'd like to think because the Center for Agroforestry is here, we have a really supportive NRCS for these practices, and have all of these practice codes turned on. But there are a lot of supporting practices too that you can use, like access control, fencing, mulching, prescribed burning, prescribed grazing, even that can support your overall management plan within forest farming. And then this is going to be tough to see, but I think this is if you go to your field office technical guide with NRCS, you can look at all of the conservation practice standards, like the list I just showed, and see what is it that they're thinking of. Might be different than what you are thinking of for some of these things. And so this is what they call a network diagram for the forest farming practice, which had been previously multi-story cropping. Now it's forest farming. And so on the where you see the yellow arrow saying this is the starting point, this is describing what they're calling the initial setting. So this is the condition that they would want to see in order to be able to justify that a resource concern is being addressed with financial and technical support for implementation of these practices. So what they have as the initial setting for forest farming is cropland or unmanaged forest with potential for growing trees or shrubs. Field concerns are organic matter depletion and lack of diverse tree and understory products and habitat. So, if you have a really thriving, healthy forest to begin with, that might not actually be the best option to go with this because they're really prioritizing people who have a resource concern. The resource concern being most often soil erosion, invasive plants that would be removed, and otherwise unhealthy or less healthy forested space. Okay, and then I was trying to figure out the best way to depict this, but this is sort of how I envision what I have witnessed, this sort of process of funneling that happens when a producer starts thinking about agroforestry and how they go from the sort of dream stage into implementation. And because there are so many options and agroforestry is really complex and context specific, the first sort of enabling conditions are the land steward's interest, their ability to actually do it, the site suitability, and their access to the land in the first place, right? Those things all have to be in place before we can continue this process. And then they need a certain level of knowledge and skill. And the extension and USDA and there are all these support systems that can really help with that. And the peer networks. The space that we're in right now is really important for folks to be able to take the next step. And really like the Jackie being up here sharing about your story, that is invaluable for these kinds of things to really happen, to be able to expand the good word about how forest farming can take place. And it's really limited right now. So it's important if you're willing to share your story, no matter what stage you're at, I encourage you to do so. And then figuring out the economics. Is it worth your time? How are you going to work it out? Who are you going to work with and how are you going to pay them? And then once you get to that point, is there a market? Once you get to this point, then that's where the infrastructure, the investment, the actual implementation can start happening. So there are all these sort of external things that can feed into this to help get folks down that funnel to that point of implementation. But it really does take a lot, and there's a lot that we still have to do to make forest farming really effective for folks to get to that point. We also at the Center for Agroforestry, as part of the training program I mentioned, the Agroforestry Training Academy, we have developed these really helpful tools, I think, that can be applied to any of those practices. So we have the Handbook for Agroforestry Planning and Design and a fully revised training manual for applied agroforestry practices. Both of those can be downloaded for free. You can get the PDF online, and that QR code takes you to that portal to download them. Um, and there are a ton of other resources there, but I really encourage you to check these out. So this helps you answer these questions about knowing your place and then coming back again to the relational aspect of being on the land. How well do you know what's happening there now? How well do you know not only the plants but the biological and physical conditions, your relationship to an ability to being in that space in essentially those, especially those critical times for collecting seed, say, or planting or harvesting. What are your objectives and dreams, and do they fit your labor and lifestyle preferences? Do you need to sustain a livelihood this way, and is that possible based on the social conditions? And then writing a plan for the next 20 years, which is longer than most plans. So, and then really importantly, continuing to adapt and listen and grow and learn from one another. I'm going to share just a couple case studies because Raylan asked me to. And I just want to acknowledge that both of these are pretty early in the planning process. And we've been working on this, at least for Lena the Osage's research farm that Badger mentioned, for years, working on planning. So just really highlighting that these things take time and it's important to take that time because they are long-lived systems. So both of these are organizational, institutional properties. Um, and there are issues I'll highlight with that too. But so we have the land access. The land of the Osages Research Center Farm is in the Ozark Highlands, northern part of the Ozark Highlands, adjacent to Lake of the Ozarks. This was gifted to the Center for Agroforestry at MU in 2019, and the person who gifted it wanted the farm to be named after an Osage chief. The advancement office at MU then uh, in a good way, checked in with Osage Nation to ask, is this okay? The name of the farm now, Lane of the Osages Research Farm, is what was desired from Osage Nation. Osage Nation Department of Natural Resources and Historic Preservation Office are both really important partners on this farm. Um, and this has been a really amazing opportunity to get to work with them in a land-based relationship. And then, of course, the University of Missouri is an important stakeholder, as are local land stewards, natural resource professionals, their extension staff who are also on the advisory committee for this farm. And we meet just annually, but we have been going through a really intentional planning and design process with all of these folks. And the idea here is to understand what are the relevant interests, especially given that this is really an intercultural and interregional, intended to be intercultural and interregional effort for research and education. And there are some existing plots, some of which are badgers from before it was Land of the Osages Research Farm, when it was the Doug Allen Farm, and really looking forward to reinvigorating those and continuing to learn from those plants. So um, I think that's all I'll say on that one. The other case study, so the highlight there is take your time. It's okay. And the other case study is the Missouri River Center. This is a newer project led by the Nature Conservancy. The other major partner on that is the Missouri River Relief. And this is a really amazing spot. It's if you're from here, this is the Catfish Katie's site. And MDC also manages some of the southern end of the property. Again, it's really all about the partnership. This is relational work. That's the message here. So the Nature Conservancy, River Relief, Center for Agroforestry were kind of the three main partners, but also we really need to keep in mind for all of this, what are our objectives? And for this property, the objectives are to be a demonstration site for natural resource professionals, especially within NRCS, to be able to show them more examples of different kinds of practices that can be used with these agroforestry programs. So the plan here is to have quite a few things going on: silvopasture with small ruminants potentially, alley cropping with pecans and native grasses, an enhanced multifunctional riparian forest buffer, and some wetland restoration. And so this is highlighting that forest farming can happen even in a space that we're not calling forest farming. So there will be some intentional plantings in the riparian forest buffer, and potentially over time in some of the alley cropping space too. Okay, so the take home pieces here that I want to leave you with, in really emphasizing that that needs to be relational and adaptive, is to be patient, pay attention, spend time on the land, learn from existing and changing conditions and relationships, share what you learn, right? Having those peer networks really helps move things forward. There are a lot of ways you can do that. There are SARE Farmer Rancher grants. And I think Jackie mentioned Emily and Paul at Three Creeks. I believe they have worked with some SARE grants. So finding other farmers who have done some of these projects is also a great way to get to take the next step. And partnering with universities and other groups can help with that too, to take on some of the administrative side of those things. And then connecting with other peer learning networks. So there's a really cool project that I believe Janine is involved in too, with the Agroforestry Regional Knowledge Exchange. And I think things are just starting to get rolling with that, but I am really looking forward to seeing what comes of it. And from what I understand, there will be some mapping of producers who are practicing these things and are interested in being peer educators, um, and hosting workshops. So if you are forest farming and you want to be a site for that kind of connection, that's one way to do it. You can also reach out to us. We'd love to chat. There's also another emerging project, the American Forest Farming Association, that Sugata and Raylan and I have all been part of for the Midwest side of things, really trying to bring Missouri into the picture, into the conversation. And then I'll just leave you with some resources that I have really appreciated over the years. There's so much more here that could be said, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. And I'm guessing folks are maybe getting a little hungry. Any questions? Yeah.
So I'm a psych major, horticulture minor. So I was really excited to see you talking about the health benefits of just being in the forest. Can you kind of explain what was it Shinrin Yoku?
Yeah. So, I should say too, Shinrin Yoku is a very culturally embedded Japanese practice. And there are, like, if you want to really be doing Yoku, there's like certification, and it's like a recognized as I think it can be prescribed in Japan, and I think other places too are adopting that practice. And I want to say somewhere recently I heard that even here there are some physicians who have worked out a way to prescribe time in nature, as like a legit, like, this is your your next step for your health, which I think is just amazing, because we know, there are chemicals in the air, in the forest. There's a lot going on that is beyond our senses, and it's amazing. I don't know enough about it to get into the details, but forest bathing is sort of the Americanized term or Western term for that practice. And I think there's some more flexibility if you're calling it forest bathing for how it's practiced. Yeah. Other questions?
So I'm just curious from your experiences now working on developing these partnerships with different organizations, if you have any suggestions or realizations of how to manage like having a certain time scale, especially working in a grant
Mhm.
space when you have
Yeah.
promises to do XYZ by this date, how you navigate needing to be slow and intentional, but also meet very real deadlines.
That is the question. Yeah, yeah, I reflect on that a lot. And and a couple things are coming to mind too that I meant to bring up in the presentation. One is that uh the land access piece, which I know is not, maybe a little more peripheral, but part of why we can take a little bit more time in planning with some of these projects than a farmer might want to, for instance, is because we have the flexibility, the sort of cushion of, like, this is one part of our work, um, and um, and there are other funding sources. Like, our livelihood isn't dependent on the next phase happening, um, and also for folks like who have an NRCS contract, those things can also take a lot longer than I think folks typically imagine they will. Anyone who's had an NRCS contract for an incentive program, I think it can be really frustrating when you think, well, I wanted to get these plants in like next month, and it's going to take me another, half a year before the everything is finalized and able to move forward. So, to name that, and the another land access timing piece, is that we recognize as beneficiaries of this land, especially the properties I mentioned, um, there that there's a big equity issue, inequity issue with land access, especially right now, and we are actively considering ways to address that within these spaces. So having long-term leases on university property, I don't think is totally out of the question. It's something that I'm just starting to ask about now. And same with the Nature Conservancy. I'm pretty sure they do conservation easements and have, have things set up for producers to be on the land, have working lands, truly working lands, and be demonstration. And really, for the Missouri River Center project, I think that would just be amazing to have a sort of incubator forest farmer space so that the infrastructure, the land, that those boxes are checked, and you can really get into learning more about it hands on without taking that huge investment risk. So yeah, I don't know that that really answered your question, but um it is a really important consideration, and totally grant timelines don't typically fit that the time that things really should take, in my opinion.
So Hannah, just in response to the question about the forest bathing,
Yeah. Oh,
so
great.
you
Okay.
made me think of something I just saw come across, my feed the other day, and that is the NC State North Carolina Arboretum in Raleigh is offering a 2-hour session. And what caught my eye on that is it's taught by a certified forest therapy guide. So we clearly have this in the US right
Yeah.
now. So if you were to just look up right now, J.C. Ralston Arboretum Forest Bathing, that would take you to that page and might lead you on that path. But then that also made me think something we haven't discussed yet here is incorporating education and agritourism into the forest farming, which
Mhm.
is turning into more and more of a thing in our region. And you're going to see be more a part of our projects because people want to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
And so just teaching them how to do it or teaching them to appreciate the woods, to understand these plants, there's tremendous opportunity there. But our farmers don't understand a lot of the liability issues, and
Mm.
there's so much that goes with adding agritourism to your farms. So
Yeah.
just another avenue, more income generation. So,
Absolutely.
yep, more
Yeah.
exciting
Thank you for
stuff.
bringing that up. And something that I always feel a little hesitant getting into the weeds on agritourism with forest farming, because these are really valuable plants. And I'm sure, as Janine can attest, when there is exposure, when the public knows what you have, that I think would also put you at more risk for potential poaching and theft. So um don't like to think that those things would happen from being a good peer educator, but totally, it's yeah, want to help folks to get into that space more too, 'cause we need it. Okay, so lunchtime.